Long before the sun appeared above the horizon, the farmer was already awake. The house around him remained quiet. Darkness still filled the corners of every room. Outside, the countryside rested beneath a pale sky touched only by a few fading stars. For a few moments he remained still beneath his quilt, listening to the familiar sounds of the farmhouse. A gentle creak came from somewhere in the wooden walls. The wind brushed softly against the roof. Far away, a rooster announced the coming day. These sounds had greeted him every morning for many years. He knew them so well that they felt almost like old friends. Slowly, he sat up. The room was cool. During much of the year, the night air found its way through small cracks around doors and windows. Even a sturdy farmhouse could not completely keep nature outside. He placed his feet upon the wooden floor. The boards felt cold. Nearby, faint embers still glowed inside the fireplace. The fire had nearly burned out during the night. The farmer stood and crossed the room carefully. His movements were quiet. Other members of the household were still sleeping. He added a few pieces of split wood to the fireplace. Soon small flames began to dance once again. A warm orange glow spread across the room. Shadows moved gently along the walls. The farmer watched the fire for a moment. There was something comforting about beginning the day this way. Before the work. Before the chores. Before the long hours in the fields. There was always this peaceful moment. Just a man and a small fire greeting the morning together. Outside, the sky slowly brightened. The stars disappeared one by one. A thin silver light appeared across the eastern horizon. Another day was arriving. The farmer dressed in simple clothes. Nothing fancy. Nothing unnecessary. His clothing had been chosen for usefulness rather than appearance. Strong boots. Durable trousers. A sturdy shirt. A coat when the weather demanded it. Every item served a purpose. Life on a farm left little room for waste. The farmer stepped outside. Cool air immediately surrounded him. He paused on the porch. Morning dew covered the grass. The world seemed fresh and clean. The fields stretched outward in every direction. Rows of crops waited quietly in the growing light. Fences crossed the landscape like lines drawn upon a painting. Trees stood motionless against the sky. The farmer took a slow breath. The air smelled of damp earth, fresh grass, wood smoke, and the faint scent of livestock from the barn. These smells formed the scent of home. Many years could pass. Many seasons could come and go. Yet these familiar scents remained part of daily life. The farmer began walking toward the barn. His boots pressed softly into the damp ground. As he walked, the countryside gradually awakened around him. Birds began singing from nearby trees. A rabbit darted through tall grass. Somewhere beyond the fields, another rooster crowed. The sounds were gentle, natural, unhurried. The barn stood near the farmhouse, its weathered boards showing the marks of countless seasons. Rain had darkened parts of the wood. Sunlight had faded others. Winter storms had tested its strength many times. Yet it remained standing. Strong and dependable. Much like the people who depended upon it. The farmer opened a large wooden door. Inside, the familiar smell of hay greeted him immediately. The barn was quiet except for the soft movements of animals beginning their day. A horse shifted its weight. A cow let out a low sound. Chickens rustled nearby. The farmer moved calmly among them. He checked each animal carefully. This was one of the most important parts of his morning. Healthy animals were essential to farm life. A horse might pull a plow. A cow might provide milk. Chickens supplied eggs. Each animal played a role. Each required attention. The farmer noticed details. Bright eyes. Healthy coats. Steady breathing. Years of experience had taught him how to recognize problems before they became serious. He filled feed troughs. He carried fresh water. He cleaned stalls. The work was not exciting. It was not dramatic. But it mattered. And much of farm life consisted of work that mattered. Quiet work. Necessary work. The kind of work that often went unnoticed. As sunlight entered through gaps in the barn walls, dust floated through golden beams of light. The farmer paused briefly and looked around. It was a simple scene. Nothing remarkable. Yet there was beauty in its simplicity. The scent of hay. The warm breath of animals. The morning sunlight. The peaceful silence. Together they created a moment that felt timeless. Outside, the sun finally rose above the horizon. Golden light spread slowly across the fields. The dew sparkled. Long shadows stretched across the ground. The entire landscape seemed to glow. The farmer stepped outside once more. He looked toward the distant fields where much of his day would be spent. The crops were growing well. Weeks of careful labor had brought them this far. Yet farming always required patience. There were no shortcuts. Seeds needed time. Rain needed time. Growth needed time. Nature followed its own schedule. The farmer understood this better than anyone. He could work hard. He could prepare the soil. He could plant and tend his fields. But some things remained beyond his control. And so he learned patience. Every farmer learned patience eventually. The seasons themselves became teachers. Spring taught hope. Summer taught effort. Autumn taught gratitude. Winter taught endurance. Year after year these lessons repeated themselves. The farmer returned to the house for breakfast. Inside, the family had begun to gather. The kitchen was warm now. The fire crackled softly. Simple food waited upon the table. Fresh bread. Eggs. Milk. Perhaps porridge or biscuits depending upon the season and what ingredients were available. The meal was not extravagant. Most farm meals were simple. But they were filling. And after hours of work, simple food often tasted best. The family ate together. Conversation was quiet. Everyone knew the day ahead would require effort. There would be fields to tend. Animals to care for. Repairs to make. Tools to maintain. The work never truly ended. Yet there was comfort in that rhythm. Each day brought familiar responsibilities. Each season brought familiar tasks. The predictability itself became a source of peace. When breakfast ended, the farmer prepared for a long day outdoors. He gathered tools. Checked equipment. Made plans for the hours ahead. The sun now sat higher in the sky. The morning air felt warmer. Birdsong filled the countryside. The day had fully begun. Standing near the edge of his field, the farmer looked across the land once more. This land had shaped his life. Its soil fed his family. Its seasons guided his work. Its changing weather influenced nearly every decision he made. For years he had walked these same paths. Worked these same fields. Watched these same horizons. And despite the hard work, despite the long hours, despite the challenges that every farmer eventually faced, there remained something deeply peaceful about this way of life. The earth beneath his feet. The open sky overhead. the steady passage of the seasons. Together they formed the quiet foundation of his world. And as the morning sun continued to rise over old America, another ordinary day began its slow and gentle journey across the countryside. The farmer stepped into the field as the morning sunlight spread across the countryside. A light breeze moved through the young crops. The plants swayed gently, almost as if they were greeting the new day. He paused for a moment and looked over the land. From a distance, farming sometimes appeared simple. A person might see neat rows of crops and imagine that nature handled most of the work. But the farmer knew differently. Every healthy field represented countless hours of effort. Each row had been prepared carefully. The soil had been turned. Stones had been removed. Seeds had been planted by hand or with simple tools. And afterward came weeks and months of attention. Watching. Waiting. Working. The farmer walked slowly between the rows. Morning inspections were important. Small problems could become large ones if ignored. A patch of weeds. Signs of insects. Areas where too much rain or too little rain had affected growth. These details mattered. His eyes moved carefully across the plants. Years of experience had trained him to notice things others might miss. A slight change in color. Leaves curling in unusual ways. Uneven growth. The land spoke quietly, and farmers learned how to listen. The work continued steadily. The sun climbed higher. Birds flew overhead. Occasionally a hawk circled above distant fields. Small animals moved through the grass beyond the fences. Nature was always present. The farmer rarely felt alone while working outdoors. There were always sounds around him. The rustle of leaves. The singing of birds. The hum of insects. The distant lowing of cattle. Even silence seemed alive. As the morning passed, the farmer began tending the crops. Some weeds needed removing. Others areas required attention around the roots of young plants. The work required patience more than speed. Hour after hour he moved carefully through the field. His hands became dusty. The sun warmed his shoulders. The smell of fresh earth filled the air. For many people, such work might seem repetitive. Yet repetition formed the foundation of farm life. The same tasks returned day after day. Season after season. Year after year. And within that repetition, a certain peace could be found. There was comfort in knowing what needed to be done. Comfort in following familiar routines. Comfort in working with the land rather than against it. By mid-morning, the countryside was fully awake. In distant fields, other farmers could sometimes be seen working. Tiny figures moving slowly beneath the wide sky. Neighbors often lived several miles apart. Yet they shared similar lives. Similar challenges. Similar hopes for good weather and healthy harvests. Sometimes a wagon appeared along a dirt road. The sound of wooden wheels drifted softly through the air. The traveler might be carrying supplies, visiting family, or heading toward a nearby town. Life moved more slowly in those days. Journeys required time. Even short trips became part of the day's rhythm. The farmer continued working. The sun gradually rose higher. The coolness of early morning faded. Warmth spread across the fields. Sweat formed along his brow. But he hardly noticed. His body was accustomed to labor. Years spent outdoors had strengthened both muscles and patience. Near the edge of the field stood an old oak tree. Its branches spread wide across the landscape. The tree had likely been standing long before the farmer was born. Perhaps it had shaded earlier generations as well. At times like this, the farmer felt connected to something larger than himself. The land endured. The seasons endured. Trees endured. People came and went, yet the countryside continued its steady rhythm. Around midday, work slowed briefly. The hottest part of the day often encouraged a short rest. The farmer walked toward the shade of the oak tree. Its leaves whispered softly overhead. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns upon the ground. He sat down and removed his hat. A small meal waited inside a cloth bundle. Simple food. Perhaps bread. Cheese. A piece of fruit. Whatever was available. Nothing extravagant. But after hours of labor, it tasted satisfying. As he ate, he looked across the fields. The crops stretched toward the horizon. Some sections were green. Others golden depending upon the season. The landscape changed constantly throughout the year. Spring fields looked very different from autumn fields. Winter transformed everything again. Yet each version of the countryside possessed its own quiet beauty. Clouds drifted slowly overhead. The farmer watched them for a few moments. Farmers often paid close attention to clouds. Clouds hinted at future weather. Rain. Wind. Storms. Or clear skies. Weather shaped nearly every part of farm life. A week of rain could help crops thrive. Too much rain could damage them. A dry season might bring worry. A gentle season might bring abundance. Nature always held the final say. After resting, the farmer returned to work. The afternoon stretched ahead. There was always more to do. A fence needed repair near the pasture. One section had weakened after recent weather. The farmer gathered tools and walked toward it. The fence crossed the landscape like a boundary between worlds. On one side grew crops. On the other grazed livestock. Strong fences protected both. Repairing them required effort but little excitement. Board after board. Post after post. Simple work. Necessary work. The kind of task repeated countless times throughout a farmer's life. As he worked, cattle grazed peacefully nearby. They moved slowly through the pasture, occasionally lifting their heads before returning to the grass. The scene was calm, unchanging. The sort of moment that could last for hours without interruption. By late afternoon, long shadows began to appear. The sunlight softened. The intense brightness of midday slowly faded. Birdsong changed as evening approached. The air cooled slightly. The farmer finished his repairs and stood for a moment. The pasture looked good. The fence felt strong. It was satisfying to complete even small tasks. Farm life offered many such quiet satisfactions. A repaired fence. A healthy animal. A growing crop. A full barn before winter. Small victories accumulated over time. Together they built a life. As the day slowly moved toward evening, the farmer began making his way back toward the barn. The animals would need attention once more. Water. Feed. A final check before night. The routines repeated themselves. Morning and evening. Day after day. Season after season. And somehow those repetitions never felt meaningless. Instead, they created structure. A steady rhythm that guided life forward. The farmer opened the barn door. Golden evening light spilled inside. Dust floated through the air like tiny stars. The animals greeted him with familiar sounds. Everything felt peaceful. Everything felt familiar. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon. The fields glowed beneath the warm light. The farmhouse stood quietly in the distance. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Home waited beyond the day's work. And across the peaceful countryside of old America, evening was beginning to settle gently over the land. As evening settled across the countryside, the pace of the day began to soften. The farmer moved quietly through the barn, finishing the last chores before nightfall. The animals seemed calmer now. Cattle stood peacefully in their places. The horses lowered their heads toward fresh hay. Chickens searched for comfortable spots where they would spend the night. The barn felt warm compared to the cooling air outside. The scent of hay, wood, and livestock filled every corner. It was a smell that had become part of daily life. To visitors, it might have seemed strong. To the farmer, it smelled like home. He carried a lantern, though there was still enough sunlight filtering through the cracks in the walls to see clearly. Golden rays stretched across the floor. Dust drifted slowly through the beams of light. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded attention all at once. The work unfolded one task at a time. That was often the way of farming. There were many responsibilities, but they rarely arrived together. Each task had its season. Each chore had its proper hour. The farmer completed one thing before moving to the next. By the time he finished, the sun had moved lower in the sky. Outside, the colors of the countryside were changing. The bright blue of afternoon softened into shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the fields. The trees along the distant hills appeared darker now. The farmer stepped outside and closed the barn door behind him. For a moment, he simply stood and looked across the land. This was one of his favorite times of day. The work was nearly finished. The heat of afternoon had faded. The air felt cooler against his skin. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. Far away, birds crossed the sky on their journey toward evening roosts. The countryside seemed to breathe more slowly. He began walking toward the farmhouse. The path was familiar. His boots had traveled it thousands of times. In spring, mud often covered sections of the trail. During summer, dust rose beneath every step. Autumn scattered fallen leaves across the ground. Winter covered everything beneath snow. Yet regardless of season, the path always led home. As he approached the house, warm light glowed through the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. The sight never failed to bring comfort. After a long day outdoors, the farmhouse felt welcoming. Safe. Steady. A place where the day's work could finally rest. Inside, supper was being prepared. The kitchen was the heart of the home. Throughout the day, family members passed through it countless times. Meals were prepared there. Stories were shared there. Work was planned there. In many ways, the kitchen connected every part of farm life. The fire crackled steadily inside the hearth. Its warmth filled the room. Iron pots hung nearby. Simple wooden shelves held dishes and cooking supplies. Nothing was extravagant. Everything was useful. The farmer washed away the dust of the day as best he could. Farm work left its mark. Soil found its way onto boots, hands, clothing, and sometimes even faces. No one worried much about it. The land was part of daily life. A little dirt simply meant work had been done. Soon the family gathered around the table. The meal reflected the farm itself. Many ingredients came directly from the surrounding land. Fresh vegetables, eggs, milk, butter, bread, sometimes meat, sometimes soup slowly cooked over the fire. The menu changed with the seasons. Summer offered different foods than winter. Spring brought its own harvests. Autumn filled storage rooms with produce gathered from the fields. Every meal reflected the time of year. The family ate together quietly. Conversation drifted from one topic to another. The weather. The crops. Neighbors. Plans for tomorrow. Simple subjects. Ordinary concerns. Yet these small conversations formed the fabric of everyday life. No grand events were necessary. The rhythm of ordinary days was enough. After supper, the farmer sometimes stepped outside again. This evening was one of those evenings. The sky had become a beautiful blend of fading colors. Orange near the horizon. Soft blue above. A few early stars appeared overhead. The air felt cool and pleasant. Nearby, insects sang their evening songs. The farmer sat for a while on the porch. From here he could see much of the surrounding land. The fields stretched outward into gathering darkness. The barn stood quietly beneath the evening sky. Trees formed dark shapes against the fading light. Everything felt still. Peaceful. The countryside possessed a different kind of beauty at night. Daytime revealed details. Night softened them. The land became quieter. Gentler. The world seemed larger beneath the stars. For farmers, evenings often provided rare moments of reflection. The work of the day was complete. Tomorrow's work had not yet begun. There was time simply to observe. To think. Or sometimes to think about nothing at all. The farmer watched as darkness slowly covered the fields. One by one, stars appeared overhead. Without city lights, the night sky looked vast. Thousands of stars filled the heavens. Some bright. Some faint. Together they formed a shimmering blanket above the sleeping countryside. Many farmers became familiar with the stars. Not through books. Not through formal study. But through years of observation. Night after night. Season after season. The same constellations appeared and disappeared. Their movements became part of life's rhythm. The farmer knew which stars belonged to winter skies. Which appeared during summer. Which rose before dawn. And which guided travelers through the darkness. Eventually the evening grew cooler. The farmer returned indoors. The farmhouse was warm. The fire still burned softly. Family members occupied themselves with quiet activities. Mending clothing. Reading if books were available. Preparing tools for tomorrow. Sometimes stories were shared. Stories passed down through generations. Memories of earlier times. Tales of hard winters. Successful harvests. Distant relatives. These stories connected the present to the past. Many evenings passed this way. Simple. Comfortable. Unhurried. The hours slipped by quietly. Soon bedtime approached. The farmer checked the fire. Secured the house for the night. Made certain everything was in order. Outside, the countryside rested beneath the stars. The animals slept in the barn. The fields stood silent beneath moonlight. The roads lay empty. Only the occasional call of a distant owl broke the silence. The farmer climbed into bed. His body felt pleasantly tired from the day's labor. Not exhausted. Not overwhelmed. Simply tired in the natural way that comes from honest work. The quilt provided warmth. The room felt peaceful. The sounds of the house returned. Soft creaks. Gentle whispers of wind. The familiar language of an old farmhouse at night. Slowly, his eyes closed. Tomorrow would bring another day. Another sunrise. Another round of chores. Another walk through the fields. The routines would repeat. And in that repetition, there was comfort. Outside, beneath a sky full of stars, the peaceful countryside of old America settled into silence as night carried the farm gently toward morning once again. Morning returned quietly. Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the fields, the countryside began its slow awakening. The night sky still held a scattering of stars. A thin layer of mist rested over low meadows and along the edges of small streams. The air carried a cool freshness that belonged only to the hours before sunrise. Inside the farmhouse, the farmer stirred from sleep. Another day had arrived. The seasons moved forward one day at a time, and farmers learned to live within that steady flow. There was always work waiting somewhere. The land never truly stood still. He rose from bed and listened for a moment. The house remained silent. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a rooster called. A few moments later, another answered from a distant farm. Their voices drifted across the countryside. The farmer smiled slightly. The day was beginning. He dressed and stepped outdoors. The cool air felt refreshing against his face. Above him, the sky showed the first signs of dawn. The eastern horizon carried a faint silver glow. The fields lay quiet beneath the morning mist. Every blade of grass seemed touched with dew. Tiny droplets reflected the earliest light. The farmer stood still for a moment, taking in the scene. Many mornings looked similar. Yet no two were exactly the same. Some mornings arrived wrapped in fog. Others came with clear skies. Some carried the promise of rain. Others hinted at long, sunny days. The countryside was always changing, even when the changes seemed small. A gentle breeze moved across the fields. The mist shifted slowly. Nearby trees rustled softly. Nature was awake before most people. Birds already stirred among the branches. Small animals moved through the grass. The farmer could hear the distant sound of flowing water from a nearby creek. These sounds formed the music of rural life. There were no engines. No traffic. No electric hum. Only the sounds of wind, water, animals, and growing things. The farmer walked toward the pasture. The grass stretched wide beneath the fading darkness. Soon the cattle would begin grazing. For now, they stood quietly, waiting for daylight. The farmer checked the fences as he walked. Strong fences mattered. A small weakness could become a large problem. A loose board. A damaged post. A broken gate. Such things were easier to repair before trouble appeared. He moved slowly along the fence line. Years of habit guided his eyes. He noticed details without effort. A farmer learned to pay attention. Attention protected crops. Attention protected animals. Attention often meant the difference between a smooth season and a difficult one. The eastern sky brightened further. The first true sunlight touched the highest branches of distant trees. Golden light spread slowly across the landscape. The mist glowed softly. For a brief time, the countryside seemed almost dreamlike. The farmer paused again. Sunrise was something he had witnessed thousands of times. Yet it never completely lost its beauty. Every sunrise felt like a quiet promise. A fresh beginning. A new opportunity to work alongside the land. The day unfolded gradually. The animals became more active. Birdsong filled the air. The barnyard came alive with movement. The farmer completed his morning chores one by one. Water buckets were filled. Feed was distributed. Tools were gathered for the day's work. Nothing dramatic happened. Most days on a farm were not dramatic. And that was part of their charm. Life moved at a pace set by nature. There was little room for hurry. Plants did not grow faster because someone rushed. Rain did not arrive sooner because someone worried. The seasons followed their own schedule. The farmer learned to follow it as well. After breakfast, he headed toward one of the larger fields. The crops there had reached an important stage of growth. They needed attention. Not because anything was wrong. Simply because healthy crops required care. Rows stretched across the field like long green ribbons. The plants stood tall and healthy beneath the morning sun. Walking between them, the farmer could hear leaves brushing softly against one another. The sound was gentle. Almost like whispers. The field seemed alive. Every plant reaching upward. Every root extending deeper into the soil. Every leaf collecting sunlight. Nature performed its work quietly. Without announcement. Without attention. Yet the results surrounded him everywhere. As the morning progressed, clouds drifted across the sky. Large white clouds moved slowly above the countryside. Their shadows crossed fields and hills. For a few moments, sunlight faded. Then brightness returned again. The farmer often watched the sky while working. Clouds revealed much about the coming hours. Dark clouds might signal rain. High thin clouds could announce changing weather. Years spent outdoors taught him to read these signs. Nature offered many clues for those willing to observe. Around mid-morning, he reached a small section of field near a creek. The water flowed steadily between grassy banks. Its surface reflected sunlight like scattered pieces of silver. The farmer stopped there briefly. The creek provided water for livestock. It also attracted wildlife. Birds gathered among nearby reeds. Frogs hid along the edges. Dragonflies hovered above the water. Life seemed to flourish wherever water flowed. He sat on a fallen log for a few moments. The shade felt pleasant. The sound of moving water created a peaceful rhythm. Many farmers appreciated these quiet pauses. Not because they avoided work, but because nature itself encouraged occasional stillness. A person could learn much by simply sitting quietly beside a creek. Watching. Listening. Observing. The world revealed itself slowly. The farmer eventually stood and returned to his tasks. The day continued. The sun climbed higher. The countryside warmed. Fields shimmered beneath the growing heat. Far away, another farmer guided a team of horses across a field. The movement appeared small against the vast landscape. Yet scenes like this unfolded across countless farms. Each family working its own land. Each household following its own routines. Together they formed the agricultural heart of old America. Most of these lives never appeared in history books. No monuments were built in their honor. No great speeches celebrated their labor. Yet their work mattered deeply. Every harvest helped feed communities. Every field contributed to daily life. The quiet effort of ordinary farmers supported entire towns and regions. As noon approached, the sunlight became stronger. The farmer removed his hat briefly and wiped his brow. The day was warming nicely. Summer still held many weeks ahead. The crops seemed pleased by the weather. The land appeared healthy. And for now, everything felt balanced. Above him, clouds drifted lazily across the blue sky. Below him, rows of crops stretched toward the horizon. Between earth and sky, the farmer continued his steady work, moving calmly through another peaceful day in the countryside of old America. By the time the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the countryside seemed wrapped in a warm and gentle stillness. The morning breeze had faded. The fields rested beneath bright sunlight. Even the birds appeared quieter now, seeking shade among trees and hedges during the warmest hours of the day. The farmer continued his work at a steady pace. There was no reason to rush. Years of experience had taught him that farm work was not a race. The land rewarded patience far more than haste. One careful hour often accomplished more than many hurried ones. As he moved through the field, the smell of warm earth rose from the soil. The scent changed throughout the year. Spring soil carried the freshness of new growth. Summer soil smelled rich and alive beneath the sun. Autumn earth held hints of drying leaves and harvested crops. Winter brought the clean scent of frost and snow. A farmer came to know these differences well. The land spoke through smells as much as through sights. The farmer paused beside a section of fence and looked across the landscape. The view stretched far beyond his own property. Rolling fields reached toward distant hills. Clusters of trees stood like islands in a sea of grass and crops. A narrow road curved gently through the countryside. From where he stood, he could see a wagon moving slowly along it. The horses pulled steadily. The driver sat calmly upon the wooden seat. No one seemed to be in a hurry. Travel itself required patience in those days. Journeys were measured differently. People expected them to take time. The farmer watched until the wagon disappeared beyond a grove of trees. Then he returned to work. Nearby, insects hummed softly among wildflowers. Bees moved from blossom to blossom. Butterflies drifted through the warm air. Nature remained busy even during the quietest hours. Every living thing seemed occupied with its own purpose. The farmer often found comfort in that thought. The land functioned as a great network of small lives working together. Plants grew. Animals grazed. Birds nested. Streams flowed. Clouds drifted overhead. Everything had its place. Everything belonged. As afternoon slowly approached, the farmer made his way toward the orchard. The orchard sat beyond one of the larger fields, sheltered by a gentle slope. Rows of fruit trees stretched across the hillside. Their branches offered welcome shade. During spring, blossoms covered the trees in delicate colors. During summer, leaves formed thick green canopies. And in autumn, fruit hung heavily from the branches. The orchard changed with every season. Yet it remained beautiful throughout the year. The farmer stepped beneath the trees. Instantly, the air felt cooler. Sunlight filtered through leaves above. Small patches of golden light danced upon the grass. The orchard carried its own special scent. Fresh leaves. Tree bark. Ripening fruit. The smell lingered softly in the air. He inspected several trees carefully. Strong branches. Healthy leaves. Good growth. Everything appeared promising. The farmer gently touched the rough bark of one old tree. It had been planted many years earlier. Perhaps by his father. Perhaps even by his grandfather. Many farms contain such living connections to earlier generations. Trees often outlived the people who planted them. Year after year they continued growing. Quiet witnesses to changing seasons and passing lives. The farmer liked that thought. Long after a day's work was forgotten, the orchard would remain. Its roots would continue reaching deep into the earth. Its branches would continue stretching toward the sky. The afternoon moved slowly forward. Clouds gathered lazily above the countryside. Not storm clouds. just soft summer clouds drifting wherever the wind carried them. Their shadows crossed fields and meadows. The landscape brightened and dimmed gently as they passed overhead. The farmer eventually found a comfortable spot beneath one of the larger trees. Here he paused for a short rest. The shade felt pleasant. A breeze moved softly through the leaves. The branches whispered overhead. It was one of the most peaceful sounds in the world. A tree speaking quietly to the wind. Many moments of farm life were like this. Simple. Easy to overlook. Yet deeply comforting. No grand event was taking place. No important announcement. No dramatic change. Just a farmer resting beneath a tree on a warm afternoon. And somehow that was enough. The countryside had a way of making small moments feel meaningful. After a while, he stood and continued walking. A narrow path led from the orchard toward a small creek. The water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Tall grasses lined its banks. Wildflowers nodded gently in the breeze. Dragonflies schemed across the surface. The creek never seemed hurried. It flowed steadily day after day. Season after season. Its waters traveled onward without complaint. The farmer often admired that quiet persistence. Streams did not rush. Trees did not rush. The seasons did not rush. Nature understood something many people forgot. There was value in moving steadily. The farmer knelt beside the creek and dipped a hand into the cool water. The temperature felt refreshing. For a few moments he simply listened. The gentle flow. The rustling grass. The distant call of a bird. These sounds blended together into a peaceful song. It was a song the countryside had been singing for generations. Long before the farmhouse was built. Long before the fences were raised. Long before the fields were planted. The land had its own voice. And those who spent enough time outdoors learned to hear it. Eventually the farmer rose and made his way back toward the main fields. The afternoon sunlight had begun to soften slightly. The hottest part of the day was passing. Long shadows would soon begin stretching across the ground once again. As he walked, he noticed a pair of rabbits near the edge of a meadow. They paused briefly, watching him. Then disappeared into tall grass. A hawk drifted silently overhead. Farther away, cattle grazed peacefully near a fence line. The countryside remained calm. Steady. Untroubled. The farmer felt grateful for days like this. Not every day brought perfect weather. Not every season brought easy harvests. Farm life could be difficult at times. Yet moments of peace were plentiful. They appeared in sunlit fields. In quiet orchards. In flowing streams. In evening skies. The farmer had learned to notice them. And because he noticed them, ordinary days often felt rich and satisfying. The afternoon continued its slow journey toward evening. The sun gradually lowered in the western sky. The colors of the landscape began to deepen. Golden light touched the tops of grasses. Trees glowed softly along the horizon. The day was gently preparing itself for another peaceful sunset over the countryside of old America. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the entire countryside seemed to relax. The bright light of midday softened into warmer shades of gold. Shadows lengthened across the fields. The air cooled little by little. It was a gradual change, so gentle that one might hardly notice it at first. Yet the farmer noticed. Years spent outdoors had made him aware of the smallest shifts in nature. He could feel the difference in the wind. He could see it in the color of the grass. He could hear it in the changing songs of birds. The day was turning toward night. The farmer walked along the edge of a cornfield. The tall stalks rose above his shoulders. Their leaves rustled softly whenever a breeze passed through. The sound reminded him of waves moving across distant water. Many farmers knew this sound well. A summer wind moving through corn created a music all its own. It was gentle, steady, almost soothing enough to lull a person into sleep. The farmer paused and listened. Thousands of leaves moved together. Not loudly. Just enough to create a soft whisper across the field. For a few moments, he simply stood there. No task demanded immediate attention. No chore required rushing. The field was healthy. The weather was pleasant. The afternoon was peaceful. Sometimes that was enough. Nearby, a flock of small birds settled along a fence. They chirped quietly among themselves. Every now and then one would lift into the air before returning to its place. The farmer smiled. Birds had always been part of farm life. Some helped by eating insects. Others occasionally caused trouble by helping themselves to grain. Yet even when they created small inconveniences, most farmers welcomed their presence. A farm without birds would feel strangely empty. Their songs filled the countryside with life. As he continued walking, the farmer reached a meadow that bordered one side of his property. Wild grasses grew there. So did clusters of flowers that appeared naturally each spring and summer. Purple blooms. Yellow blooms. White blooms. Nature arranged them without concern for neat patterns. Yet somehow the result always looked beautiful. Bees drifted among the blossoms. Butterflies floated from flower to flower. The meadow seemed alive with quiet movement. The farmer often enjoyed visiting this place. Unlike the carefully managed fields, the meadow belonged mostly to nature. It grew according to its own wishes. The grasses bent where the wind directed them. The flowers appeared where seeds happened to land. The result felt free and peaceful. A narrow path crossed the meadow. The farmer followed it slowly. The ground beneath his boots felt soft. Sunlight filtered through the tall grass. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. It was a simple pleasure. Walking through a meadow. Feeling the wind. Listening to insects hum among the blossoms. Such moments rarely appeared in history books. Yet they formed an important part of everyday life. The peaceful moments often matter just as much as the busy ones. Eventually the path led toward a small rise overlooking much of the surrounding countryside. From there, the farmer could see fields stretching into the distance. Barns stood scattered across the landscape. Thin trails of smoke rose from a few chimneys. Roads wound between farms and woodlands. Far away, sunlight reflected from the surface of a river. The view was wide and open. The farmer removed his hat and looked across the land. This countryside had shaped countless lives. Families had worked these fields for generations. Children had grown into adults here. Parents had grown old here. Entire lifetimes unfolded beneath these same skies. The seasons came and went. The years passed quietly. Yet the land endured. It remained patient through everything. Patient through droughts. Patient through storms. Patient through good harvests and poor ones. The farmer respected that patience. Nature never hurried. And because nature never hurried, farm life often felt calmer than life elsewhere. The farmer sat beneath a nearby tree. The shade felt pleasant. Leaves rustled overhead. A squirrel moved carefully along one branch before disappearing into the canopy. For a few moments, the farmer closed his eyes. The sounds around him blended together. Birdsong. wind, insects, the distant lowing of cattle. Together they created a gentle background melody. There was something deeply comforting about these familiar sounds. Many people spent their lives surrounded by them. Morning after morning, year after year, the sounds became part of memory itself. As the sun lowered further, the golden hour arrived. It was one of the most beautiful times of day. The light became softer, warmer, almost magical. Fields seemed to glow from within. Trees were outlined in gold. Even ordinary objects appeared beautiful beneath the evening sunlight. The farmer stood and began making his way back toward the farmhouse. The path carried him past pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. The animals moved slowly through the grass. Some stood quietly. Others rested beneath trees. None appeared concerned about time. They simply followed the natural rhythm of the day. The farmer appreciated that. Animals rarely worried about tomorrow. They existed comfortably within the present moment. As he approached the barn, he could hear horses shifting inside. The familiar sounds welcomed him. A horse stamped its hoof. Another snorted softly. The farmer entered the barn and began the evening chores. These tasks were much like the morning ones. Feed, water, observation, routine. The repetition never bothered him. In fact, there was comfort in it. Every evening followed a familiar pattern. The animals expected it. The farmer expected it. The day gradually came to a close through these small acts of care. Outside, the sky became more colorful with each passing minute. Orange near the horizon. Pink above it. Soft blue farther overhead. Clouds caught the fading sunlight and glowed gently. The farmer finished his work and stepped outside once more. The barnyard looked peaceful. The farmhouse windows reflected the evening sky. The fields stretched quietly into the distance. Everything felt calm. Everything felt settled. Soon darkness would arrive. Lanterns would glow inside the house. The family would gather for supper. Stories and conversations would fill the evening hours. But for now, there was only this beautiful moment between day and night. The farmer stood quietly, watching the sunset spread across the countryside. The sun moved lower and lower. The fields darkened. The first evening star appeared above the horizon. And as the light slowly faded from the land, another peaceful day gently approached its end in old America. The last light of day lingered across the countryside. For a few precious moments after the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the sky continued to glow. Soft shades of orange slowly faded into pink. Pink faded into lavender. Lavender faded into deep blue. The transformation happened gradually, almost too slowly to notice. The farmer stood quietly near the farmhouse and watched. He had seen thousands of sunsets throughout his life. Yet each one felt slightly different. Clouds changed. Colors changed. Seasons changed. No two evenings were ever exactly alike. As darkness settled over the fields, the sounds of the countryside began to change as well. The birds that had sung throughout the day grew quieter. Some disappeared into trees. Others settled among bushes and hedges. In their place came the voices of evening creatures. Crickets began their steady music. Frogs called from ponds and creeks. Somewhere far away, an owl announced its presence. The countryside never became completely silent. It simply exchanged one collection of sounds for another. The farmer enjoyed this transition. It marked the end of work and the beginning of rest. The air felt cooler now. A pleasant breeze drifted across the fields. The warmth stored in the earth throughout the day slowly escaped into the evening sky. The farmer took a deep breath. The sense of the countryside seemed stronger after sunset. Fresh grass, warm soil, wood smoke from nearby chimneys, the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Together they created a fragrance unique to rural evenings. Nearby, the farmhouse windows glowed with lantern light. Golden squares of brightness shone against the growing darkness. The sight was welcoming, comforting. Home waiting patiently at the end of the day. The farmer stepped inside. The warmth of the kitchen greeted him immediately. The fire burned steadily in the hearth. Its light danced across the walls. Shadows moved gently around the room. The family gathered near the table. Supper had already been prepared. Simple food filled the room with pleasant aromas. Fresh bread rested on a wooden board. Vegetables from the garden sat in bowls. A pot of stew simmered gently near the fire. Everything looked inviting. The family took their seats. Meals were important moments on a farm. Not because they were elaborate. Most meals were simple. But because they brought everyone together. The work of the day paused for a while. Tools were set aside. Fields were left behind. Attention shifted toward family and home. Conversation flowed quietly around the table. People spoke about the day's work. About animals. About crops. About weather. Perhaps someone mentioned a neighbor who had visited recently. Perhaps plans were discussed for the coming days. Nothing extraordinary. Just the ordinary topics that filled ordinary lives. Yet these conversations formed lasting memories. Years later, people often remembered simple evenings more clearly than grand occasions. After supper, the dishes were cleaned and put away. The kitchen gradually became quieter. Outside, darkness deepened across the countryside. The stars multiplied overhead. One by one they appeared until the sky seemed filled with countless points of light. Without city lights to compete with them, the stars looked astonishingly bright. The farmer often stepped outside after supper just to see them. Tonight was no different. He carried no lantern. Moonlight and starlight were enough. The yard stretched quietly before him. The barn stood dark and still. The fields beyond seemed almost endless beneath the night sky. He looked upward. The stars filled every corner of the heavens. Some shone brightly. Others appeared faint and distant. Together they created a magnificent display. Generations of farmers had looked upon these same stars. Children had learned their patterns. Travelers had used them for guidance. Old stories had been told beneath their light. The sky connected the present to the past in a way few things could. The farmer knew many of the constellations. Not from books, but from years of observation. Season after season they appeared. Winter stars. Summer stars. Autumn stars. Spring stars. Each had its proper place in the cycle of the year. The stars themselves became another kind of calendar. A silent calendar written across the sky. The farmer walked slowly toward the edge of the yard. From there he could hear the distant sound of a creek flowing through the darkness. The water moved steadily, just as it had during the day. Just as it had yesterday. Just as it would tomorrow. Some things changed constantly. Others remained reassuringly the same. The creek belonged to the second group. It continued its journey regardless of season or weather. Listening to it brought a sense of peace. The farmer sat upon a wooden bench near the house. For a while he simply observed the night. The countryside possessed a special kind of stillness after dark. The world seemed larger. The sky seemed deeper. The land seemed calmer. Even familiar places felt slightly mysterious beneath moonlight. The trees appeared as dark silhouettes. The fields became broad shadows. The roads disappeared into darkness. Everything looked softer, gentler. Time itself seemed to move more slowly. Inside the house, the family continued their evening routines. Some mended clothing. Some prepared items for tomorrow's work. Some read by lantern light if books were available. These quiet activities filled many evenings throughout the year. Entertainment was often simple. Yet simplicity brought its own satisfaction. People learned to appreciate small pleasures. A good story. A warm fire. A comfortable chair. The sound of rain against the roof. The farmer eventually returned indoors. The evening was growing late. Tomorrow would arrive sooner than expected. Farm life followed the sun, and sunrise came early. The fire crackled softly. Lantern light flickered across the room. Everything felt peaceful. The farmer checked the doors one final time. The animals were safe. The house was secure. The day was complete. One by one, the lights were extinguished. Darkness settled throughout the farmhouse. Family members retired to their rooms. The house grew quiet. Only the faint sound of the fire remained. Outside, the stars continued shining above the sleeping countryside. The moon cast pale light across fields and pastures. The barn rested peacefully beneath the night sky. The animals slept. The crops stood quietly in the darkness. The roads remained empty. The farmer lay beneath his quilt and listened. The familiar sounds returned. A soft creak in the walls. A gentle whisper of wind outside. The distant call of an owl. These sounds had ended countless days before. Tonight they would do so once again. His eyes grew heavy. The long hours of honest work had brought a comfortable tiredness. Not exhaustion. Simply the natural weariness that followed a productive day. Slowly, sleep arrived. Outside, the countryside remained calm beneath the stars. The seasons continued their patient journey. The land rested. And another peaceful night settled gently over the farms of old America. Morning arrived once more, not with noise or urgency, but with the gentle certainty that had guided life in the countryside for generations. The eastern horizon slowly brightened. Night loosened its hold on the land. Stars faded one by one. A thin ribbon of pale silver appeared above the distant hills. The fields, which had rested beneath darkness only moments before, slowly began to emerge. Fences became visible. Trees revealed their shapes. The barn appeared once again against the growing light. The farmer awoke to the familiar sounds of the farmhouse. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. The wind brushed softly against the walls. Far away, a rooster announced the beginning of a new day. Everything felt familiar. Comfortingly familiar. The same sounds. The same rhythms. The same quiet beginning that had greeted him countless times before. He rose from bed and dressed. The room was cool. Outside, a light mist covered the low areas of the farm. The farmer stepped outdoors and paused. Morning air filled his lungs. Fresh. Clean. Carrying the scent of grass and damp earth. The world seemed newly washed. Every leaf glistened with dew. Every blade of grass sparkled beneath the first hints of sunlight. The countryside looked peaceful beyond words. A few birds were already awake. Their songs drifted through the still air. From a nearby tree came a cheerful chorus. Farther away, another bird answered. The sounds spread gradually across the landscape as more creatures greeted the morning. The farmer walked toward the garden behind the farmhouse. Unlike the large fields, the garden required close attention. Rows of vegetables filled the neatly organized space. Beans climbed wooden supports. Lettuce grew in tidy patches. Carrots rested unseen beneath the soil. Squash spread broad leaves across the ground. Everything seemed healthy. The farmer moved slowly along the rows. Gardens played an important role in farm life. They provided fresh food throughout much of the year. Every season brought something new to harvest. In spring, tender greens appeared. Summer offered vegetables in abundance. Autumn filled baskets with the final harvest before winter. The garden demanded patience, but it rewarded care. The farmer knelt beside one row and gently examined the plants. Morning dew rested upon the leaves. Tiny droplets reflected the sunlight like little jewels. Nature often displayed its beauty in small ways. A dew-covered leaf. A spider web shining in the sun. A single flower opening to the morning sky. The farmer had learned to notice such things. Years spent outdoors encouraged careful observation. The world revealed countless details to those willing to look. As the sun rose higher, golden light spread across the farm. The mist began to disappear. Warmth slowly returned to the land. The farmer finished his inspection of the garden and headed toward the chicken yard. The chickens greeted him immediately. They moved about busily, scratching at the ground and searching for food. Their activity always seemed cheerful. They rarely stood still for long. Each bird appeared occupied with its own important mission. The farmer smiled as he watched them. Chickens were a constant presence on many farms. Their eggs supplied food nearly every day. Their familiar clucking filled the barnyard with life. The farmer collected eggs carefully and placed them into a basket. Each one represented another small contribution from the farm. Many aspects of rural life depended upon these steady, dependable routines. Nothing spectacular. Nothing dramatic. Just countless small tasks working together. One egg. One bucket of milk. One repaired fence. One row of healthy crops. Over time, these small things created abundance. The farmer carried the basket back toward the house. Smoke was already rising from the chimney. Breakfast preparations had begun. The scent of cooking drifted through the morning air. It was a welcoming smell. A reminder that the day had truly started. After breakfast, the farmer gathered a few tools and headed toward the woods at the edge of his property. The woods differed greatly from the open fields. Beneath the trees, the air felt cooler. Shadows covered much of the ground. Birdsong echoed between trunks and branches. The farmer enjoyed these walks. The woods provided resources important to farm life. Firewood, timber, wild berries during certain seasons. Medicinal plants known to many rural families. Yet beyond their practical value, the woods also offered peace. Stepping beneath the trees felt like entering another world. Sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. The forest floor carried the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Every sound seemed softer, more distant. The farmer followed a familiar path. Generations of footsteps had worn it into the ground. Family members had walked this route countless times. Perhaps children had once run along it. Perhaps grandparents had traveled it years earlier. The path connected past and present. As many farm paths did. A woodpecker tapped steadily against a tree somewhere ahead. The sound echoed through the forest. Nearby, a squirrel darted across the trail before disappearing among the roots of an old oak. The woods were full of life. Most of it hidden. Most of it quiet. The farmer eventually reached a small clearing. Sunlight poured into the open space. Wildflowers grew there. Butterflies drifted lazily from blossom to blossom. The scene felt untouched. Peaceful. As though it had existed exactly this way for many years. He paused for a moment and looked around. There was no need to hurry. The woods taught patience just as the fields did. Trees grew slowly. Sometimes very slowly. Yet over decades they became strong and enduring. The farmer admired that. The ability to grow steadily without rushing. The ability to endure season after season. After a short while, he gathered the firewood he had come to collect. Piece by piece, he loaded it carefully. Winter might still be far away. Yet wise farmers always prepared early. The seasons moved quickly. A warm summer day could make winter seem distant. But eventually cold winds would return. Preparation today created comfort tomorrow. The farmer began the walk back toward the farmhouse. Sunlight now filled the countryside. The day was fully awake. Fields shimmered beneath the bright sky. Birds moved across the landscape. The barnyard bustled with activity. Life continued its steady rhythm. One task leading naturally to another. One season gradually becoming the next. And beneath the wide blue sky of old America, the farmer carried his bundle of firewood home, moving calmly through another ordinary and deeply peaceful day. The farmer crossed the yard with the bundle of firewood resting comfortably against his shoulder. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting bright light across the farm. The coolness of dawn was fading. Warmth slowly spread over the fields, the barn, and the weathered wooden buildings that stood upon the land. As he approached the woodshed beside the farmhouse, he carefully stacked the firewood with the rest. Each piece was placed neatly. Order mattered on a farm. A tidy woodshed made winter easier. A tidy barn made chores easier. A tidy workshop made repairs easier. Small habits saved time later. The farmer had learned this lesson long ago. Much of farm life involved preparing for days that had not yet arrived. Wood was gathered before winter. Seeds were saved before spring. Food was stored before cold weather came. Planning ahead was simply part of everyday living. After storing the wood, the farmer looked toward the pasture. The cattle grazed peacefully beneath the morning sky. Their movements were slow and relaxed. Every now and then one would lift its head and look around before returning to the grass. The scene felt calm. Almost timeless. A person could stand there for several minutes and witness very little change. Yet life continued all the same. The grass grew. Clouds drifted. The seasons advanced. Nature rarely rushed. The farmer walked toward the pasture fence. As he did, a light breeze moved across the countryside. The grass bent gently beneath it. Leaves rustled in nearby trees. The sound carried across the landscape like a soft whisper. The farmer always enjoyed windy days. Not strong storms. Just gentle breezes. The kind that cooled the air and made the fields seem alive. The pasture stretched across a broad section of land. Unlike the crop fields, which changed appearance dramatically throughout the year, the pasture remained familiar through most seasons. Green in spring. Green in summer. Golden in autumn. Quiet beneath snow in winter. Its changes were gradual. Subtle. The farmer leaned briefly against the fence and looked across the grazing animals. Caring for livestock required patience. Animals could not be hurried any more than crops could. They grew according to their own natural pace. Good care required consistency. Fresh water. Healthy food. Shelter from severe weather. Attention to small details. Every day brought similar responsibilities. The farmer found comfort in that consistency. There was satisfaction in knowing what needed to be done. Life felt steady, reliable, grounded. After checking the pasture, he continued toward a small pond near the edge of the property. The pond reflected the blue sky above. Its surface was nearly still. Only occasional ripples disturbed the reflection. A frog leaped from the bank into the water. Circles spread outward before gradually disappearing. Dragonflies hovered above patches of reeds. The pond was a quiet place. A peaceful corner of the farm. Many animals visited throughout the day. Birds came to drink. Deer sometimes appeared at dawn or dusk. Insects gathered near the water's edge. The pond supported countless small forms of life. The farmer sat beneath a nearby willow tree. Its long branches swayed gently in the breeze. The shade felt cool and pleasant. For a few moments, he simply rested. The farm did not always demand constant movement. There were pauses between tasks. Moments when observation became more important than action. Farmers often spent much of their lives watching. Watching weather. Watching crops. Watching animals. Watching seasons unfold. Observation itself was a form of work. The farmer watched sunlight sparkle across the pond. A cloud drifted overhead. Its reflection moved slowly across the water. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing felt urgent. The countryside had a way of reminding people that not every moment needed to be filled with activity. Sometimes simply sitting quietly beneath a tree was enough. Eventually, the farmer stood and resumed his work. The day continued. There were tools to inspect. Equipment to maintain. Small repairs that needed attention before they became larger problems. He walked toward the workshop near the barn. The building was simple. Its shelves held tools gathered over many years. Hammers. Saws. Axes. Shovels. Each tool showed signs of use. Smooth handles worn by countless hours of labor. Metal surfaces marked by years of work. The farmer picked up a hoe and examined it carefully. A loose handle needed attention. Such repairs were common. Tools worked hard on a farm. They deserved proper care. He settled onto a wooden stool and began making the repair. The work required patience but little effort. As he worked, sunlight entered through an open window. Dust floated lazily through the beams of light. The workshop felt quiet and comfortable. The smell of wood surrounded him. Nearby, a horse shifted inside the barn. A chicken clucked somewhere outside. The sounds blended naturally together. No single sound dominated. Instead, they created a gentle atmosphere that felt deeply familiar. The farmer often enjoyed these quieter tasks. Field work required physical strength. Tool repair required attention. Both were important. Both had their place. By late morning, the repair was complete. The farmer set the tool aside and stepped outside. The sky remained clear. White clouds drifted slowly overhead. The weather seemed ideal. Not too hot. Not too cool. Days like this often became cherished memories later in life. Not because anything remarkable happened, but because everything felt right. The air. The sunlight. The land. The simple pleasure of moving through familiar routines. The farmer walked toward the garden once more. A few vegetables were ready for harvesting. He gathered them carefully into a basket. Fresh beans. A handful of squash. Several ripe tomatoes. Their colors stood out brightly against the green leaves. The harvest was modest. Yet every basket carried indoors represented the success of weeks or months of effort. Seeds planted long ago had become food. Nature had completed another quiet miracle. The farmer carried the basket back toward the house. The kitchen door stood open. Warm sunlight filled the room. The scent of fresh bread drifted outward. The farmer paused briefly on the porch. Before him stretched the farm. The fields. The pasture. The barn. The orchard beyond. Everything seemed peaceful beneath the midday sun. He looked across the landscape and felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Not for anything extraordinary. Simply for the ordinary blessings of the day. Good weather. Healthy crops. Steady work. A comfortable home. Sometimes the most meaningful things were also the simplest. And as the sun continued its slow journey across the sky, another calm and satisfying day unfolded across the peaceful countryside of old America. The midday hours arrived gently, spreading warm sunlight across every corner of the farm. The farmer placed the basket of vegetables on the kitchen table and stepped back outside. The day had settled into that quiet period when the countryside seemed to slow down. The morning's cool freshness had disappeared. The warmth of the sun now rested upon the fields. Grass shimmered softly in the light. Trees cast wide pools of shade across the ground. Even the animals seemed content to move more slowly. The farmer walked toward the orchard once again. A narrow path wound between fences and patches of wild grass. His boots followed the familiar route without thought. He had walked these paths so many times that they felt like extensions of home itself. Every bend. Every gate. Every tree. Each was known to him. As familiar as the rooms inside the farmhouse. The orchard greeted him with its cool shade. Rows of fruit trees stretched across the gentle hillside. Their leaves stirred softly whenever the breeze arrived. Sunlight filtered through the branches in scattered patches of gold. The ground beneath the trees felt cooler than the open fields. The farmer paused beneath one of the oldest apple trees. Its trunk was thick and deeply textured. The bark carried the marks of countless seasons. Years of rain. Years of snow. Years of bright summer days. Yet it continued to stand strong. The farmer often felt a quiet respect for old trees. They seemed to possess a kind of wisdom. Not through words, but through endurance. They remained where they were planted. Growing slowly. Weathering storms. Welcoming each new season. There was something admirable about such steady persistence. The orchard required attention throughout the year. Branches sometimes needed trimming. Fallen fruit needed collecting. Young trees needed protection. The work was never difficult all at once. Instead, it arrived in small portions throughout the seasons. A little today. A little tomorrow. Many farm tasks followed that pattern. The farmer walked among the trees, inspecting them carefully. The fruit appeared healthy. Leaves glowed green beneath the sunlight. Birds moved among the branches. A squirrel raced along a limb overhead before disappearing into the leaves. Life seemed comfortable here. Peaceful. Balanced. The farmer stopped near the edge of the orchard where the hillside overlooked a broad valley. From this vantage point, much of the surrounding countryside could be seen. Fields stretched outward in neat patterns. Pastures rolled gently across the landscape. Small farms appeared here and there in the distance. Their barns and houses looked tiny beneath the vast sky. The farmer stood quietly. The view never grew old. No matter how many times he saw it. The countryside possessed a quiet beauty that revealed itself slowly. A person could spend years living there and still discover new details. A patch of wildflowers beside a fence. A hawk circling high above. Morning fog drifting across a distant meadow. Beauty often arrived in small moments. The farmer eventually continued down the hillside toward a small section of woodland. The woods offered relief from the midday warmth. Tall trees formed a natural roof overhead. Their leaves filtered the sunlight into soft green shades. The air felt cool and still. A pleasant contrast to the bright fields beyond. The farmer enjoyed walking through the woods. There was no need for conversation there. The forest seemed complete without words. Birds sang from hidden branches. Leaves rustled gently. A woodpecker tapped somewhere in the distance. The sounds were enough. Nature provided its own company. A narrow trail curved through the trees. Roots crossed the path. Moss covered fallen logs. Fern leaves spread across the forest floor. The farmer followed the trail at an easy pace. Nothing hurried him. The farm would still be there when he returned. The crops would continue growing. The animals would continue grazing. The clouds would continue drifting overhead. Everything moved according to its own rhythm. The woods reminded him of that truth. After a short walk, he reached a small clearing. Sunlight poured into the open space. Wildflowers covered patches of grass. Butterflies floated lazily from bloom to bloom. The clearing felt untouched, as though it had existed in peaceful silence for generations. The farmer sat upon a fallen log. Nearby, a small stream wound through the clearing. The water moved quietly over smooth stones. Its gentle sound filled the air. The farmer listened. Streams possessed a calming quality. Their steady movement encouraged reflection. One could sit beside running water for a long time without becoming bored. The stream was never exactly the same. The water constantly changed. Yet it always remained itself. The farmer watched sunlight sparkle upon the surface. Tiny ripples formed where the current passed around rocks. A dragonfly landed briefly on a reed before lifting into the air once more. Everything seemed peaceful. Simple. Uncomplicated. Many people imagined history as a collection of great events. Wars. Leaders. Important decisions. Yet most lives were built from moments like these. A quiet afternoon beside a stream. A walk through familiar woods. The scent of leaves warming in sunlight. The sound of water flowing gently through the countryside. These ordinary moments shaped daily existence far more than grand events ever could. The farmer eventually rose and made his way back toward the farm. The sun remained high, though it had begun its slow journey westward. Afternoon would arrive soon. Long shadows would eventually return. But for now, the countryside rested beneath bright summer light. As he emerged from the woods, the fields greeted him once again. Golden sunlight stretched across rows of crops. The barn stood proudly near the farmhouse. The pasture beyond shimmered in the warmth. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked familiar. The farmer smiled softly and continued walking home, carrying with him the quiet calm of the woods as another gentle afternoon unfolded across the farms and fields of old America. The afternoon settled comfortably over the countryside. The sun had begun its gradual journey toward the western horizon, though many hours of daylight still remained. The warmth was pleasant now. Not as intense as midday. A soft breeze drifted across the fields from time to time, carrying with it the scent of grass, wildflowers, and freshly turned earth. The farmer returned to the main yard and paused beside the well. The old stone well had served the farm for many years. Its wooden frame showed signs of age. The rope had been replaced more than once. The bucket had weathered countless seasons. Yet it remained dependable. Like many things on the farm, it was valued not for its appearance but for its usefulness. The farmer lowered the bucket into the cool darkness below. A moment later came the faint sound of water. Then he drew the bucket upward slowly. The water glistened in the sunlight. Clear. Cold. Refreshing. He took a drink and felt the coolness spread through him. There was something satisfying about water drawn directly from the earth. Simple pleasures often felt richest in the countryside. A cool drink on a warm afternoon. Shade beneath a tree. Fresh bread from the oven. The sound of rain after a dry spell. These small comforts became treasured parts of daily life. After returning the bucket, the farmer headed toward one of the far fields. The walk itself was pleasant. A narrow path wound between fences and stretches of grass. Wildflowers grew beside the trail. Bees drifted lazily among the blossoms. The countryside appeared peaceful from every direction. As he walked, he noticed the subtle signs of the changing season. The days still felt warm, but there were hints that summer would not last forever. Some grasses had begun turning slightly golden. A few leaves showed the faintest signs of color. Nature was already preparing for what would come next. The farmer understood these signs. People who lived close to the land learned to notice such changes. The earth announced each season long before it officially arrived. The field he approached sat on a gentle slope. Rows of crops stretched neatly across the hillside. The plants moved softly whenever the wind passed through. From a distance, the field looked almost like water, waves of green rolling beneath the sky. The farmer spent some time inspecting the rows. Everything seemed healthy. The crops stood tall. The soil remained moist from recent rain. No obvious problems revealed themselves. That was always welcome news. Farming contained enough challenges without inviting more. The farmer often believed that one of the secrets of a peaceful life was learning to appreciate days when nothing went wrong. Those days rarely made stories. Yet they were often the best days of all. The afternoon drifted onward. Clouds wandered lazily across the sky. Their shadows moved over fields and fences. Birds continued their journeys from tree to tree. The landscape seemed content. The farmer eventually reached a fence line that bordered a neighboring property. Beyond it stretched another farm. Different buildings. Different fields. Different family. Yet many aspects of life were exactly the same. The same sunrise. The same changing seasons. The same dependence upon weather and soil. Farmers often shared an understanding that required few words. Their lives followed similar rhythms. Their challenges were familiar. Their hopes often looked alike. A good harvest. Healthy animals. Enough rain. A safe winter. Simple wishes. Yet important ones. The farmer leaned briefly against the fence and gazed toward the neighboring fields. In the distance, he could see another farmer working. The figure appeared small against the vast landscape. Slowly moving across the land. One person among many who spent their lives caring for the countryside. The sight brought a quiet sense of connection. Across the region, countless people were engaged in similar tasks. Tending crops. Repairing fences. Gathering food. Preparing for future seasons. Together they formed the quiet backbone of rural life. The farmer continued his walk. Soon he reached a meadow that spread between the fields and a small grove of trees. The grass there grew taller than in the pasture. Wildflowers bloomed among it. The breeze created gentle waves across the surface. The meadow seemed alive with movement. Yet nothing felt hurried. A pair of rabbits darted through the grass. A hawk circled high above. Butterflies drifted through patches of sunlight. The farmer sat beneath a tree at the edge of the meadow. The shade offered welcome relief from the afternoon sun. For a while, he simply watched. Observation had become second nature to him. Many hours of farm life were spent paying attention, noticing, learning, waiting. Nature rewarded patience. The longer one observed, the more one saw. A bird gathering nesting material. Ants following invisible paths through the grass. Clouds slowly changing shape. Tiny details that might otherwise pass unnoticed. The farmer enjoyed these moments. They required nothing from him except presence. No tools. No labor. No planning. Just quiet awareness. The breeze strengthened slightly. Leaves rustled overhead. The meadow swayed gently. The sound reminded him of countless afternoons from years gone by. Childhood afternoons. Young adulthood. Middle age. The landscape had witnessed every stage of his life. The same fields. The same hills. The same sky. Though the years changed people, the countryside seemed to maintain its steady character. That continuity brought comfort. Eventually, the farmer rose and continued toward home. The afternoon was beginning its slow transition toward evening. The sunlight had softened almost imperceptibly. Shadows stretched a little farther than before. The day was moving forward, as all days did. Steadily. Quietly. Without hurry. As he walked back across the fields, a flock of birds lifted suddenly from a distant hedge. For a brief moment they filled the sky. Then they settled elsewhere and disappeared from view. The countryside returned to its familiar calm. The farmer smiled. Another ordinary afternoon was unfolding exactly as it should. The land remained peaceful. The weather remained kind. The work remained steady. And beneath the wide and endless sky of old America, the gentle rhythm of farm life continued without interruption, carrying the day slowly toward another beautiful evening. The afternoon gradually softened into the early hours of evening. The change came so slowly that it almost escaped notice. The sunlight lost a little of its brightness. The air became slightly cooler. The shadows of trees stretched farther across the ground. Nature was quietly preparing for the end of another day. The farmer walked back toward the farmhouse at an easy pace. The path curved through open fields where tall grasses swayed in the breeze. Every step felt familiar. The countryside around him had become a part of who he was. He knew every hill, every fence, every grove of trees, every bend in the creek. Years of walking the same land created a special connection. The farm was not simply a place where he worked. It was the landscape of his life. As he approached the barn, he noticed the warm afternoon light resting upon its weathered boards. The wood glowed softly in shades of gold and amber. The barn had endured many seasons. Summer heat, winter snow, heavy rain, strong winds. Yet it remained standing, solid and dependable. The farmer often admired such quiet strength. Many things in the countryside shared that quality. Old barns, ancient trees, stone walls. They endured simply by continuing to do what they were meant to do. No grand speeches. No recognition. Just steady service year after year. The farmer stepped inside the barn. The familiar scent of hay greeted him immediately. Sunlight entered through small openings in the walls. Golden beams crossed the dusty air. Tiny particles floated lazily through the light. Everything felt calm. The animals were comfortable. The horses shifted gently in their stalls. The cattle rested peacefully. A few chickens wandered near the entrance. The farmer moved among them, checking their water and feed. He spoke softly from time to time. Not because the animals understood every word, but because calm voices created calm surroundings. The animals recognized his presence. His routines were familiar to them. Morning and evening. Day after day. The same gentle rhythm. The farmer appreciated that reliability. Life contained enough uncertainty. The steady routines offered balance. Outside, the sky continued changing. Clouds drifted slowly toward the horizon. The sunlight grew warmer. Fields that had appeared bright green earlier now seemed painted with gold. Even ordinary weeds along the fences looked beautiful beneath the evening light. The farmer completed his chores and stepped back outside. For a few moments he stood beside the barn and simply looked across the land. This was one of the quietest times of day. The busiest work was finished. The evening meal had not yet begun. A peaceful pause existed between them. The farmer often treasured these moments. The countryside seemed especially beautiful in late afternoon. A gentle stillness settled over everything. Birdsong softened. The breeze slowed. Even the animals appeared more relaxed. The farmer began walking toward the orchard. The path carried him through a section of grass dotted with wildflowers. Bees continued their work among the blossoms. Butterflies drifted slowly through the warm air. The scene felt peaceful beyond measure. The orchard welcomed him with cool shade and the scent of leaves. Sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. The trees stood quietly, their leaves rustling whenever the breeze returned. The farmer paused beneath one of the oldest trees. Its trunk was broad. Its roots reached deep into the earth. Its branches stretched high toward the sky. He imagined how many seasons it had witnessed. How many springs? How many autumns? How many winters? Perhaps generations of children had climbed its branches. Perhaps generations of farmers had rested beneath its shade. The tree remained. Patient and enduring. There was something comforting about that. The farmer sat beneath it for a short while. Nearby, birds moved among the branches. A squirrel darted up the trunk before disappearing into the canopy. The leaves whispered softly overhead. The sounds blended into a peaceful background melody. The farmer closed his eyes for a moment. The warmth of the day lingered. The scent of grass filled the air. Everything felt calm. Life in the countryside was not always easy. There were storms. There were droughts. There were difficult seasons. But there were also moments like this. Moments when the world seemed perfectly balanced. Moments when simply sitting beneath a tree felt like enough. After a time, he rose and continued walking. The orchard overlooked a wide valley beyond the farm. From that vantage point, he could see distant fields glowing beneath the lowering sun. Thin trails of smoke rose from chimneys far away. The roofs of neighboring farms caught the golden light. The landscape appeared peaceful from one horizon to the other. The farmer leaned lightly against a fence and watched. He could see cattle grazing in the distance. A wagon moving slowly along a road. Birds crossing the sky. Small scenes unfolding quietly across the countryside. No great event commanded attention. No urgent matter interrupted the peace. Just ordinary life continuing at its natural pace. And that was enough. Perhaps that was one reason many farmers learned to appreciate simplicity. The countryside taught it. A beautiful sunset required nothing. A cool breeze required nothing. Birdsong required nothing. The best moments often arrived freely. The sun continued lowering. The sky slowly deepened in color. Golden tones became richer. Orange began appearing near the horizon. The first hints of evening painted themselves across the landscape. The farmer knew supper would soon be ready. The family would gather around the table. The farmhouse would glow warmly against the approaching darkness. The familiar routines of evening would begin. But for now, there was still this quiet moment. A farmer standing beside a fence. A peaceful valley stretching before him. The sun slowly descending toward the horizon. And all around him, the gentle countryside of old America preparing itself for another calm and beautiful night. The sun moved lower and lower toward the horizon, and the countryside seemed to glow beneath its fading light. Golden fields became amber. Amber became copper. The colors deepened with each passing minute. The farmer remained beside the fence for a while, watching the slow transformation. There was no hurry to leave. Sunsets had a way of encouraging stillness. The work of the day was nearly complete. The evening meal would come soon. For now, there was only the quiet beauty of the land. A flock of birds crossed the sky in the distance. Their dark shapes moved gracefully against the warm colors of the sunset. For a few moments, they caught the light and seemed to shine. Then they disappeared toward a distant grove of trees. The countryside returned to silence. A soft breeze moved through the grass. The leaves in the orchard rustled gently. Somewhere nearby, a cricket began its evening song. Others soon joined. The music of night was beginning. The farmer started the walk back toward the farmhouse. The path wound between fields that stretched peacefully beneath the evening sky. The crops seemed almost luminous in the fading light. Rows that had looked ordinary during the afternoon now appeared beautiful. Every plant cast a long shadow. Every leaf reflected traces of gold. Nature often revealed new beauty during the quiet hours between day and night. As he walked, the farmer noticed the familiar smells of evening. The scent of warm earth cooling after a long day in the sun. Fresh cut grass from a nearby pasture. Wood smoke drifting from chimneys. The smells blended together into something deeply comforting. It smelled like home. It smelled like the countryside. The farmhouse stood ahead, its windows catching the last rays of sunlight. The glass glowed softly. Smoke rose from the chimney and drifted lazily into the evening sky. The sight always brought a feeling of peace. No matter how long the day had been, the farmhouse waited at the end of it. A place of warmth. A place of rest. A place where the day's labor could finally be set aside. The farmer stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath his boots. He paused for a moment before entering. From there, he could see much of the farm. The barn. The pasture. The orchard. The distant fields. Everything looked calm beneath the approaching twilight. Inside, the kitchen felt warm and welcoming. The fire crackled gently in the hearth. Lantern light mixed with the fading sunlight coming through the windows. The room carried the pleasant aromas of supper. Fresh bread. Vegetables from the garden. A pot simmering slowly over the fire. Simple food prepared with care. The farmer washed his hands and joined the family at the table. Meals marked important moments in the day. Not because they were grand occasions, but because they brought everyone together. The day's work faded into the background. For a little while, attention shifted toward conversation and companionship. People spoke quietly. Perhaps someone mentioned a patch of vegetables that was growing particularly well. Perhaps there was discussion about weather expected later in the week. Perhaps stories from earlier years found their way into the conversation. The topics were simple. Yet they mattered. Ordinary life was built from such moments. The meal passed comfortably. No one rushed. There was time to enjoy the food. Time to enjoy the company. Time to enjoy the warmth of the room. Outside, darkness slowly spread across the countryside. The bright colors of sunset faded into softer shades. The first stars appeared overhead. One by one they emerged from the deepening blue sky. After supper, the family remained together for a while. Evenings often unfolded slowly on the farm. Without modern distractions, people created their own quiet routines. Some repaired clothing. Some prepared supplies for the next day. Some read if books were available. Others simply sat and enjoyed the warmth of the fire. The farmer settled into a chair near the hearth. The flames danced behind the iron grate. Their glow filled the room with soft light. There was something timeless about a fire in the evening. Generations had gathered around hearths just like this one. Stories had been told beside them. Lessons shared. Memories created. The fire connected the present to countless evenings from the past. Outside, the night continued to deepen. The moon rose above the fields. Its pale light spread across the landscape. The barn became a dark silhouette. The trees stood quietly against the sky. The roads disappeared into shadows. Everything seemed softer beneath moonlight. After a while, the farmer stepped outside once more. The air felt cool and refreshing. Crickets sang steadily. Frogs called from a distant pond. The stars shone brilliantly overhead. Without city lights, the night sky appeared vast beyond imagination. Thousands of stars filled the heavens. The farmer looked upward. He had spent his entire life beneath these skies. As a child, he had gazed at the same constellations. As a young man, he had watched them while working late in the fields. Now, after many years, they remained unchanged. Faithful companions through every season of life. The moonlight painted the fields in silver. The crops stood quietly beneath its glow. The fences cast long shadows across the ground. Everything appeared peaceful. The farmer breathed deeply and listened. The countryside possessed a special silence at night. Not the absence of sound, but a gentle collection of natural noises. The whisper of wind. The song of insects. The distant call of an owl. Together they created a calm atmosphere that seemed perfectly suited to rest. Eventually, the farmer returned indoors. The evening had grown late. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise. Another day of work. Another day of familiar routines. And that thought brought comfort rather than burden. There was peace in knowing what tomorrow would hold. The fields would still be there. The animals would still need care. The seasons would continue their patient journey. The rhythms of farm life would remain steady. One by one, the lanterns were extinguished. The farmhouse grew quiet. The fire settled into glowing embers. Family members retired to their rooms. Outside, the moon continued its slow journey across the sky. The countryside rested beneath a blanket of stars. The farmer climbed into bed and listened to the familiar sounds of the old house. A floorboard creaked softly. The wind brushed against the walls. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night. Slowly, sleep arrived. And beneath the moonlit skies of old America, another peaceful day gently faded into memory as the farm settled into the quiet embrace of the night. Before long, the night began to loosen its hold on the countryside. The moon drifted lower toward the horizon. The stars gradually faded. A faint glow appeared in the east, so subtle at first that it seemed more imagined than real. Yet little by little, darkness gave way to morning. The farm remained quiet. The fields rested beneath a thin blanket of mist. The barn stood silent. The trees appeared as dark shapes against the brightening sky. For a few precious moments, the world seemed suspended between night and day. Inside the farmhouse, the farmer slept peacefully beneath his quilt. The comfortable tiredness from yesterday's work still lingered. Outside, however, nature had already begun preparing for another day. Birds stirred among the branches. A breeze moved softly through the grass. The first rooster called into the morning air. Soon another answered. Then another. Their voices carried across the countryside, announcing the arrival of dawn. The farmer opened his eyes. For a moment, he remained still. The room was quiet. The house felt peaceful. He listened to the familiar sounds that had greeted him for countless mornings. The creak of old wood. The whisper of wind. The distant calls of birds. These sounds belonged to the farm as surely as the fields and fences. They formed part of the rhythm of daily life. Slowly, he rose and dressed. The floor felt cool beneath his feet. The morning air carried a freshness that only existed before sunrise. Stepping outside, he was greeted by the sight of mist stretching across the fields. It drifted lazily over the low ground. Fence posts emerged from it like islands in a pale sea. The scene looked almost dreamlike. The farmer paused to admire it. Many people might have considered mist nothing more than weather. To him, it was part of the beauty of the land. Every season offered its own sights. Spring blossoms. Summer meadows. Autumn leaves. Winter snow. And on certain mornings, fields wrapped in silver mist. The eastern sky brightened further. Hints of gold appeared along the horizon. Soon the sun would rise. The farmer walked toward the barn. His boots pressed softly into the dew-covered grass. Each step released the scent of fresh earth and growing things. The countryside smelled alive. Healthy. Renewed. The barn door opened with a familiar creak. Inside, the animals were beginning to stir. A horse shifted in its stall. A cow let out a low, gentle sound. The chickens were already awake, eager to begin their day. The farmer greeted them quietly. Morning chores began much as they always did. Water buckets were checked. Feed was distributed. Stalls were cleaned. Everything followed a familiar pattern. Some might have called it repetitive. The farmer saw it differently. The routines created stability. They provided structure to the days and seasons. The animals depended upon that consistency. And in many ways, so did he. As sunlight began entering through the cracks in the barn walls, dust floated through the golden beams. The sight never failed to capture his attention. Tiny particles drifted lazily through the light. Simple. Ordinary. Yet strangely beautiful. Life on the farm often revealed beauty in unexpected places. A shaft of sunlight. A spider web covered in dew. The shadow of a tree stretching across a field. The farmer learned long ago that beauty did not need to be rare to be meaningful. Outside, the sun finally appeared above the horizon. Golden light spread across the countryside. The mist began to dissolve. Fields emerged clearly once more. Trees glowed along their edges. The entire landscape seemed to awaken beneath the warmth of the new day. The farmer stepped outside and looked across his land. The sight filled him with quiet satisfaction. The crops stood healthy. The pasture looked green. The barn remained sturdy. Everything appeared as it should. Of course, farm life was never perfect. There were always challenges somewhere ahead. But this morning offered no sign of trouble. Only promise. Only possibility. Only another day waiting to unfold. He walked toward the garden. Morning was one of the best times to visit it. The vegetables seemed especially vibrant beneath the fresh sunlight. Dew sparkled upon every leaf. Tiny droplets reflected the sky. The farmer inspected each row carefully. Beans climbed their supports. Tomatoes ripened slowly. Squash spread broad leaves across the soil. Everything showed signs of healthy growth. The garden represented patience made visible. Seeds planted weeks earlier had transformed into living plants. Soon they would become meals shared around the family table. The process felt almost magical, even after years of experience. Nature performed wonders quietly. Without applause. Without recognition. Simply doing what it had always done. A small rabbit darted between rows before disappearing beneath a fence. The farmer smiled. Wildlife visited the garden regularly. Some visitors were welcome. Others occasionally caused trouble. Yet they all belonged to the countryside. The farm was not separate from nature. It was part of it. The farmer understood this well. After leaving the garden, he followed a path toward the orchard. Morning sunlight filtered through the leaves. Birds moved among the branches overhead. The air carried the faint scent of fruit and fresh greenery. Everything felt calm. The orchard was one of his favorite places during the early hours. Before the day grew warm. Before work became busy. The trees seemed especially peaceful in the morning. Standing beneath them, he could hear little except birdsong and the breeze. The farmer rested a hand against the trunk of an old apple tree. Its bark felt rough beneath his fingers. The tree had witnessed many years. Perhaps more than he had. Perhaps more than his father had. It stood quietly, season after season, asking for little and giving much. Shade. Fruit. Beauty. The farmer admired such simple generosity. The sun climbed steadily higher. The morning advanced. Birdsong filled the countryside. The fields shimmered beneath fresh light. The barnyard bustled with activity. Another day had begun. Not a remarkable day. Not a historic day. Just an ordinary day on an old American farm. And perhaps that was what made it so peaceful. The ordinary rhythms. The familiar sights. The steady passage of time. Together they created a life that moved gently with the seasons, beneath the endless sky, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the countryside. The morning continued to unfold with the same calm rhythm that had guided life on the farm for generations. The sun climbed steadily into the sky. The last traces of mist disappeared from the fields. Dew evaporated from the grass. Warmth slowly settled over the countryside. The farmer left the orchard and followed a narrow path that led toward the far side of his property. His pace was unhurried. There was work to do, certainly. There was always work to do. Yet the farm taught patience. Rushing rarely improved anything. The crops would grow at their own speed. The seasons would arrive when they were ready. The farmer had learned long ago that life felt easier when he moved with nature rather than against it. The path crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek. The bridge was simple. Just sturdy planks supported by heavy beams. Nothing decorative. Nothing elaborate. Yet it served its purpose well. The farmer paused in the middle and looked down. The water flowed quietly beneath him. Sunlight reflected from its surface in bright flashes. Tiny fish moved through the clear shallows. The creek never seemed to hurry. Day after day, year after year, it followed the same course. The farmer often admired that. There was wisdom in steady movement. The water eventually reached its destination not because it rushed, but because it never stopped. After a few moments, he continued on. Beyond the creek stretched a meadow that changed constantly throughout the seasons. In spring it filled with fresh green growth. In summer it became a sea of waving grasses and wildflowers. Autumn painted it in shades of gold. Winter covered it with frost and snow. Each season transformed the meadow completely. Yet somehow it always remained recognizable. The farmer walked through the tall grass. The stems brushed gently against his boots. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze. Bees drifted from blossom to blossom. Butterflies floated through patches of sunlight. The meadow seemed peaceful and alive at the same time. Nothing appeared still. Yet nothing seemed hurried. Every living thing followed its own natural rhythm. The farmer appreciated that. The countryside offered countless reminders that life did not need to move quickly to move forward. At the far end of the meadow stood a grove of maple trees. Their trunks rose straight and tall. Their leaves formed a canopy of green overhead. The shade beneath them felt cool and pleasant. The farmer entered the grove and immediately noticed the difference. The air was quieter here. Softer. The sunlight arrived only in scattered patches. Birds moved among the branches. A squirrel paused briefly on a limb before racing away. The grove felt like a peaceful retreat from the open fields. The farmer often visited this place. Not because work required it. Simply because he enjoyed it. Even on busy farms, there were small corners where a person could pause and breathe. Places where the sounds of the world seemed distant. Places where thoughts could wander peacefully. He found a comfortable spot beneath one of the larger trees and sat down. The ground was covered with soft grass. The leaves overhead whispered whenever the breeze passed through. The sound was gentle. Almost like distant waves. For a while, the farmer simply listened. No plans. No worries. Just the rustling leaves. The songs of birds. The occasional hum of insects. Such moments rarely lasted long. The responsibilities of the farm always returned eventually. Yet even brief periods of quiet reflection felt valuable. They refreshed the mind much as sleep refreshed the body. After some time, the farmer stood and began the walk back toward the fields. The sun now sat high above the countryside. The day was growing warmer. Clouds drifted lazily across the blue sky. Their shadows crossed the land like slow-moving ships. The farmer reached a section of fencing that bordered one of the pastures. A few boards required attention. Nothing serious. Just the ordinary wear that came from weather and time. Repairs like these were constant companions in farm life. Wood aged. Nails loosened. Storms left their marks. Keeping everything in good condition required steady effort. The farmer gathered his tools and set to work. The task was simple. A few boards replaced. A few nails hammered into place. The sound of his work echoed softly across the pasture. Nearby, cattle grazed peacefully. They seemed entirely unconcerned with the repairs. Occasionally one would glance in his direction before returning to the grass. The farmer smiled. Animals often possessed a calmness worth admiring. They focused on the present moment. The warmth of the sun. The taste of fresh grass. The comfort of familiar surroundings. There was wisdom in that simplicity. The repair work continued steadily. The farmer never rushed. Each board was positioned carefully. Each nail driven securely. Good work saved effort later. A fence repaired properly could withstand years of weather. When the task was finished, he stepped back to examine it. Everything looked strong again. Dependable. Ready for many more seasons. The satisfaction that followed was quiet but genuine. Farm life offered many such rewards. Not dramatic rewards. Not public recognition. Just the simple knowledge that something useful had been done well. The farmer gathered his tools and continued walking. The afternoon was still some distance away. The day stretched comfortably before him. Birds crossed the sky. Clouds drifted overhead. The breeze moved through the fields. The countryside seemed content. The farmer felt much the same. Ahead stood the farmhouse, surrounded by gardens and shade trees. Beyond it stretched the orchard. Farther still lay the fields, reaching toward the horizon. Everything existed within its proper place. Everything followed its proper season. And beneath the bright summer sky of old America, another peaceful day continued its slow and gentle journey across the land. The day moved forward with quiet confidence. The repaired fence stood strong behind the farmer now, blending once again into the landscape as though it had never needed attention at all. The cattle grazed peacefully nearby, and the breeze continued its gentle journey across the fields. The farmer walked slowly toward the farmhouse. The sun stood high overhead. Light covered every corner of the land. The roofs of the buildings gleamed softly. The leaves of the orchard shimmered whenever the wind stirred them. The entire farm seemed alive beneath the warmth of the day. As he approached the yard, he noticed a few chickens wandering freely near the garden fence. They scratched at the soil with great determination. Every patch of ground appeared worthy of investigation. The farmer watched them for a moment. Their endless curiosity always seemed amusing. From sunrise until sunset they remained busy. Searching. Exploring. Inspecting every corner of the farm. The chickens hardly seemed aware that the world extended beyond their immediate surroundings. And perhaps that was part of their contentment. They devoted themselves entirely to the moment before them. The farmer continued past the garden. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly across the rich soil. The plants had grown considerably since spring. Each week brought noticeable changes. Leaves grew larger. Stems became stronger. Fruit slowly appeared. Gardens provided a visible reminder of how quickly a season could pass. The farmer remembered planting these rows weeks earlier. At the time, many of the seedlings had seemed tiny and fragile. Now they stood strong beneath the summer sun. Growth often happened quietly. So quietly that it could be overlooked. Yet day by day, little changes became significant ones. Life itself often worked the same way. The farmer paused beside a patch of tomatoes. Several were beginning to turn red. Not fully ripe yet, but close. Soon they would be ready for harvest. He gently examined a few plants before moving on. Nearby, bees traveled among flowering herbs planted near the edge of the garden. The air carried pleasant scents. Mint. Basil. Fresh earth warmed by sunlight. The smells blended together naturally. The farmer took a deep breath. There was no perfume more pleasant than the scent of a healthy summer garden. Beyond the garden stood the well. Its stone walls remained cool even during the warmest days. The farmer lowered the bucket once again. The rope creaked softly as it descended. A few moments later, he drew up fresh water. Droplets sparkled in the sunlight. He filled a small cup and drank. The water tasted cool and clean. Simple. Refreshing. There were many comforts on a farm, but cold well water on a warm day ranked among the finest. Afterward, he sat for a few moments beneath a large oak tree near the house. Its branches spread wide across the yard. The shade beneath it was deep and pleasant. Generations of children had likely played beneath its limbs. Generations of adults had rested beneath its canopy. The tree seemed woven into the history of the farm itself. The farmer leaned back against the trunk. Above him, leaves rustled softly. Sunlight filtered through the branches in shifting patterns. Small patches of brightness danced across the grass. The scene felt peaceful. The countryside often offered these small moments of rest. Not long periods of idleness. Simply brief pauses between tasks. Moments to appreciate the day. Moments to observe the world. Moments to listen. The farmer could hear distant sounds from across the property. A horse moving inside the barn. Birds calling from the orchard. The breeze passing through rows of corn. Each sound arrived softly. None demanded attention. Together they created the familiar music of farm life. Eventually, the farmer rose and headed toward the workshop. There were several tools that needed sharpening. The work was not urgent. Yet maintaining tools before they became dull always made future tasks easier. Inside the workshop, the air smelled of wood and metal. Sunlight entered through an open window. Dust drifted lazily through the beams of light. Everything felt calm. Orderly. Comfortable. The farmer selected a shovel first. The blade showed signs of many hours spent working in the soil. He settled onto a stool and began sharpening it carefully. The work required patience. Slow, steady movements. No rushing. No shortcuts. The sound of metal against stone filled the room. A quiet scraping rhythm. Back and forth. Again and again. There was something almost meditative about such work. The farmer's hands moved from long habit. His thoughts wandered peacefully. Perhaps he considered tomorrow's chores. Perhaps he remembered seasons long past. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed the stillness. Outside, the afternoon continued to mature. Clouds drifted across the sky. Shadows shifted gradually. The farm moved through its daily cycle. Every hour possessed its own character. Morning felt fresh and full of possibility. Midday brought warmth and energy. Afternoon encouraged steady work. Evening offered reflection and rest. The farmer appreciated each part of the day. Together they formed a balanced whole. After finishing the shovel, he sharpened several other tools. One by one they received the attention they needed. When the work was complete, he examined them with satisfaction. Good tools made farm life easier. And caring for them properly was simply another part of caring for the farm itself. The farmer stepped outside. The sunlight had softened slightly. Though there was still plenty of day remaining, afternoon was slowly advancing toward evening. The breeze felt cooler now. More comfortable. The fields beyond the yard glowed beneath the sun. The orchard stood quietly on its hillside. The barn cast a long shadow across the grass. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked familiar. And as the farmer gazed across the land he called home, another calm chapter of the day unfolded beneath the wide and endless skies of old America, where life moved gently with the seasons and every ordinary moment carried its own quiet beauty. The afternoon continued its slow and unhurried journey. The farmer stood for a moment outside the workshop, feeling the gentle breeze upon his face. Above him, clouds drifted lazily across the sky. They moved so slowly that they seemed almost still, changing shape little by little as they crossed the vast blue expanse. The countryside appeared peaceful in every direction. The fields stretched toward the horizon. The pasture rolled gently across the landscape. The orchard rested upon its hillside. The farmhouse stood quietly among shade trees that had watched over generations of farm families. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed rushed. It was a day much like countless others. And yet that was part of its beauty. Ordinary days often became the most treasured memories. The farmer began walking toward the orchard once more. The path wound through a section of open grass where wildflowers bloomed among patches of clover. Bees moved steadily from flower to flower. Their work never appeared hurried. They simply moved with purpose. One blossom. Then another. Then another. The farmer often noticed how nature seemed to favor steady effort over sudden bursts of activity. Trees grew slowly. Streams flowed patiently. The seasons changed gradually. The land accomplished remarkable things without ever appearing to rush. As he entered the orchard, cooler air greeted him. The leaves overhead filtered the sunlight into soft green shades. The branches swayed gently. A few pieces of fruit hung among the leaves, still ripening beneath the warmth of summer. The orchard possessed a special kind of peace. The sounds of the wider farm felt more distant here. Birdsong echoed softly between the rows. The rustle of leaves became the loudest sound. The farmer moved among the trees, occasionally pausing to inspect a branch or examine a piece of fruit. Nothing required immediate attention. The trees appeared healthy. Their leaves were strong and green. Their roots reached deep into the earth. The farmer felt grateful for that. Healthy trees represented years of patience. An orchard was not created quickly. The people who planted young saplings often waited many seasons before seeing full harvests. Some never enjoyed the complete results of their labor. Instead, they planted for future generations. The farmer admired that idea. There was something noble about working for a future one might never fully see. Many aspects of farm life involved that kind of thinking. Trees were planted. Stone walls were built. Barns were repaired. Fields were improved. All with the understanding that others would benefit as well. The farmer stopped beneath an especially old apple tree. Its trunk was thick and sturdy. Its bark carried deep grooves formed by time. Looking at it felt almost like looking into history itself. How many summers had it witnessed? How many winters had it endured? How many children had rested beneath its shade? The tree gave no answers. It simply continued growing. Year after year. Season after season. Its quiet endurance spoke for itself. The farmer eventually continued toward the far side of the orchard, where a small rise overlooked the surrounding countryside. From there, he could see much of the farm. The view spread outward beneath the afternoon sun. Fields formed patches of green and gold. The barn stood proudly near the farmhouse. Beyond the property, other farms dotted the landscape. Thin roads connected them. Small streams wound through valleys. Woodlands covered distant hills. The countryside seemed endless. The farmer sat upon a smooth stone near the crest of the hill. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. The view invited reflection. Many afternoons throughout his life had included moments like this. Quiet pauses. Simple observations. Time spent looking across the land. The farm changed gradually over the years. Trees grew larger. Buildings aged. Fields shifted from one crop to another. Yet the overall character of the landscape remained familiar. That familiarity brought comfort. The farmer knew where the sun would rise. He knew where shadows would fall. He knew how the hills looked during every season. The land had become part of him. And he had become part of the land. Below the hill, a narrow stream reflected the sunlight. Its surface sparkled like scattered pieces of glass. The water continued its journey without interruption. The farmer watched it for a while. Streams possessed a calming quality. Perhaps it was their steady movement. Perhaps it was their quiet voice. Whatever the reason, people had always found peace beside flowing water. The farmer certainly did. The afternoon moved onward. The sunlight slowly became warmer in color. The shadows grew a little longer. Birds crossed the sky in small groups. The first hints of evening remained far away, yet they could already be sensed by someone paying attention. Nature always announced its changes gradually. Nothing happened suddenly. The farmer rose from the stone and began making his way down the hillside. Near the bottom stood a patch of blackberry bushes. The berries were beginning to ripen. Soon they would be ready for picking. The farmer examined them briefly. Nature provided many gifts throughout the year. Wild berries, nuts, mushrooms, useful plants. The countryside offered abundance to those who learned where and when to look. As he continued walking, a rabbit emerged from the grass ahead. For a moment it remained perfectly still. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, it disappeared into a nearby thicket. The farmer smiled. Wildlife had always been part of daily life. Deer at dawn. Foxes at dusk. Birds throughout the day. The farm existed alongside countless creatures. The land belonged to all of them in one way or another. When he reached the main yard again, the shadows had noticeably lengthened. The barn cast a dark shape across the grass. The leaves of the oak tree shimmered in the breeze. The farmhouse windows reflected the afternoon light. Everything seemed calm, steady, comfortable. The farmer paused and looked around. There was still work ahead before evening arrived. Animals would need attention once more. Water buckets would need checking. A few final chores remained. Yet there was no feeling of burden. These tasks were simply part of the rhythm. Part of the cycle. Part of the peaceful and enduring life of a farmer in old America. And beneath the warm afternoon sun, the day continued to unfold exactly as it had been meant to, carrying the farm slowly and gently toward another beautiful evening. And so, as the afternoon light rested gently upon the fields, the farmer stood quietly in the yard and looked across the land that had shaped his life. The barn stood strong beneath the sky. The orchard swayed softly in the breeze. The garden continued its patient growth. Far beyond, the fields stretched toward the horizon in shades of green and gold. Nothing extraordinary happened that day. No great event interrupted the calm. No dramatic change arrived upon the wind. It was simply another day. A day of steady work. A day of familiar paths. A day of sunlight, birdsong, and quiet moments beneath old trees. And perhaps that was the true beauty of such a life. The farmer did not measure his days by excitement. He measured them by the changing seasons. By healthy crops. By warm meals shared with family. By the comfort of knowing that tomorrow would begin much like today. The land asked for patience. The seasons taught humility. The passing years brought wisdom in small and gentle ways. Around him, the countryside continued its endless rhythm. The wind moved through the grass. Clouds drifted across the sky. Birds crossed above the fields. The earth carried on exactly as it always had. The farmer took one final look across the peaceful landscape. Then he turned toward home. Toward the familiar farmhouse waiting beneath the shade trees. Toward the warmth of family. Toward the quiet comfort of evening. Behind him, the fields remained calm beneath the soft afternoon light. Ahead of him, another peaceful evening waited. And as the sun slowly continued its journey across the sky, the old farm rested peacefully within the vast American countryside, surrounded by silence, simplicity, and the steady passage of time. The wind whispered through the trees. The grass swayed gently. The land remained patient. And the story drifted onward with the seasons, fading softly into the quiet stillness of the countryside.